So this week, our goal in English 1010E is to focus on revising your personal narrative or your narrative self-portrait. Revising means to look at again. Now, part of this revising means you as the writer could look at your writing again, but it may also be helpful to get a friend or a tutor or someone else to also look at your writing and give you suggestions. When we revise, it doesn't just mean we look at or read, but it means that we make changes to what we're looking at. And some ways to think about those changes are we may want to move things. Maybe we introduce something later in the paper, but it might be better to include that information earlier. We may want to add some information that helps clarify. Maybe our story is not very clear and we need to provide information for the reader. We may decide to delete things that are not important or change the way we describe things to make it clearer. We're going to talk about two primary revision suggestions. The first one is to help you focus on a theme, and the second one is to help you focus on showing the story instead of just telling the story. So when we think about what is the main theme of your story, what's the main lesson or idea that you want the reader to remember or understand based on the experience that you described? As we think about that theme or lesson, we may have to decide that there are some details that we have written in our first draft that are not relevant, not important to the story. They may distract the reader, they may take up space, they may slow down the reader. Let's get rid of those irrelevant details and just use the details that are important to help the reader get the main theme. At the same time, we may want to consider adding other details or another scene to our story. Maybe part of our theme is about how we have changed through this personal experience. So maybe what we want to do is add a short scene, maybe earlier in the paper, that explains how we felt or acted before this experience, and then we can show how we felt and acted after, and that comparison between those two scenes could help better communicate our theme. So the main idea here is thinking about really what matters in this paper. What is the main lesson or goal I want the readers to understand? And let's just make sure that the only information I include here is really important to that story. Everything else, let's get rid of. Showing, on the other hand, includes more description. Often it includes more dialogue, so speaking between characters, and we can see the actions happening through the words. In this sense, showing is more like a movie where we don't have to be told everything. There's no narrator describing every single detail in terms of summarizing what's happening, but instead the writer has given us scenes where we can understand now what's happening. Let's take a look at some examples of showing versus telling. So here on the left we have a sentence, "I was very scared." This is an example of a telling sentence. It clearly identifies the feeling and it's very short and direct. But on the other side we have more of a showing. Now this does take more words, but it probably creates a better feeling and emotion in the reader. "My face went white and my breathing stopped." Now, we can understand that someone is scared because of that description, but that description gives us a lot more details where we can imagine maybe what the person looks like or sounds like as they're experiencing this emotion. Here's another example. "She was impatient and she told me to go." Okay, that's a very direct way to explain that interaction between people. On the other side, instead of giving sentences to tell about that interaction, we have some dialogue that explains it. "What are you waiting for?" she snapped. "Get moving." Okay? So here we can better imagine maybe how that person feels and how the listener might even respond because it's using the showing kind of language. Here's one last example. "It was a hot day and everyone felt lazy." Versus our showing example, the sun beat down, baking the earth and its inhabitants. Grandpa stretched out on his chair, hoping the low breeze would cool his skin. My aunt closed her eyes as she fanned herself with a dishcloth. Obviously, the second one takes more words, but we can better imagine the situation by having these showing descriptions. So that's something you may want to look back as you go to your story. Is there a way you could make your story seem more like a TV show instead of just a quick news story where you quickly go through the details and the reader can't really imagine what it was like to be there? So as you work on your writing this week, remind yourself that your main goal is to revise your paper. Think of this phrase, MAD C: move, add, delete, and change. You want to focus on your theme and include the elements that are important to communicating your theme and delete everything that's not. And then as you tell your story or your stories, make sure you're using showing language and not telling language. At any point during the week, feel free to contact your instructor through inbox messages or email.